Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today we're wrapping up all the books that I read in May and June, which I decided to combine because I was slumping really hard through both months and also just kind of generally busy. So I didn't read very much. I think we have 3 books to talk about today. But the first one that I read back in May, the only book I finished in May, was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I decided to pick this one up for, I think it was a video I was working on at some point. I genuinely don't even really remember, but I picked this one up thinking like, there's a new movie out. There've been a lot of discussions around the movie, so I'd like to actually read the book and be able to have like a fully formed opinion on the book, and then maybe at some point watch the movie and have some thoughts on that as well. But I really enjoyed Wuthering Heights, and honestly, from what I've heard of the movie, I don't think I'm that interested in watching it. But I really enjoyed Wuthering Heights. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. I don't remember off the top of my head, but this one is not what I was expecting it to be, because I think generally I've heard like, it's a tragic romance, and no, it's 2 terrible people being terrible to each other and to all of the people around them, and just dragging everyone around them down. I opened this book and I was not prepared for there to be a framing narrative and a character whose name I cannot remember. Mr. Lockwood, yes, that's his name, who is the new tenant of one of the houses involved in the story. He lives at Thrushcross Grange, which is where I think, heck, what's her name? I can't remember anybody's names. It's been a while since I read this. Catherine. She marries into a family that lives at Thrushcross Grange. And so between there and Wuthering Heights, there's a lot of interplay between the people in these 2 houses. And so Mr. Lockwood moves into Thrushcross Grange, which is owned by and run by Heathcliff at the point that the book starts. And then he is learning from the other characters, particularly the housekeeper at Thrushcross Grange, who was a sort of childhood friend of both Heathcliff and Catherine. I say childhood friend. She worked for the family, but I think her mother worked for the family, and she was very young. She was a little bit older than them, but still a child at the same time that they were, so she kind of grew up as almost like an older sibling to them before transitioning into a like primarily servant role. And so she's explaining to Mr. Lockwood the history of the family, and I just thought it was fascinating. I think that Heathcliff and Catherine are both really fascinating people, and there's the sense that like part of why they're so toxic and dangerous to the people around them is that Catherine can never be attained. Like her purpose is in, her identity is enveloped in the experience of being wanted, to being desired. And so she like, if she does not have that, where people are desiring her and kind of pursuing her, she sort of ceases to exist. She kind of reaches an ultimatum point in the middle of the story. And then meanwhile, Heathcliff, I don't think, is able to ever stop desiring. He's sort of the inverse of Catherine, that rather than being desirable and pursued, he is someone who is always desiring. There's always things that are kind of out of his reach. And his entire identity is built around this idea that there are things that he deserves that are out of his reach, and so he constantly has to push to get them. And he's sort of willing to do whatever and harm whoever he has to get the things that he feels like he is owed. But if he achieves what he's after, then like his identity starts to fall apart, because, who is he if he is not reaching for something that he can't have? And so I thought that was a really interesting characterization for both of them, and it's just like, it's a really sad story, and I thought it was just fascinating watching these 2 terrible people sort of spiral around each other and eventually take down like everybody around them. And yeah, it was just really interesting. I don't know how much else I can say about it other than it was just a weird read. It wasn't what I was expecting at all, and I really enjoyed the way that it explored this relationship between these 2 awful people. And then the second book I read here, this is the first book I finished in June, is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is her memoir of being in an abusive relationship with another woman, and she's doing this exploration of that time through the lens of this thing called the Dream House, which is sort of the house that they lived in, but also sort of the relationship itself. And she's looking at it through all of these different lenses, all these different genres of writing and different ways of thinking about the dream house. And there's also this like multiple layers of different POVs, because some of the sections are written like they're academic essays that are giving some sort of context for the story that she's telling and why she's telling it. And then there's sections that are from like a first person POV, like I did this, I experienced this, where she's talking about experiences she had kind of before and after the dream house. They provide additional context for the experiences she had in the dream house, either how she ended up in that relationship or the ways that she has like processed that information afterwards. And then the sections that are actually detailing the abuse that she experienced are written in the second person you, and she establishes kind of early on that the you that she's referring to is sort of an older version of herself that experienced those events, that is sort of separate from her, but also isn't separate from her, and is sort of dead, but also not dead. And all of that is then also through the use of you kind of mixed up with the reader. So the reader is put in the shoes of this past version of the author experiencing the events. So it's very like emotionally intense. And I thought it was a really interesting structure, kind of an experimental feeling book without it feeling like it was a gimmick. I think that there's a sense throughout the book that the way it's written is also partially how Carmen Maria Machado is like processing what she's experienced and thinking through things for herself. Almost like, and my friend and I were talking about this about the time I was reading it, and we were talking about it because we were talking about the concept of like the stories that you consume frame the way you think about your own life and your own story, the way you would like talk about yourself. And so I think there's a feeling here of that where Carmen Maria Machado has experienced all these different genres and is using all of these different forms of writing in different genres that she is familiar with to think through her own experiences, using the narrative she's consumed to figure out how to frame her own narrative and understand what she's gone through. And so I just felt like this was really interesting. It's really well crafted. Her writing is just very, very good. And so I feel like even though it's a really difficult topic, it's not like an unpleasant reading experience, but it is something I feel like you have to kind of go in with the right mindset, and it's something I feel like is really important to read. I feel like there's something to be said for witnessing stories like this. I think she talks kind of early on about like the concept of the archive and the fact that there aren't a lot of well-known stories about abuse happening within queer relationships, and this pervasive idea that has continued to impact law and social understandings of abuse, that like the idea that women can't abuse each other. And so she's kind of putting her story out there as like evidence against that, as like we need to fill in this gap that is currently being filled by the erroneous idea that women can't abuse each other. And so I feel like it's important as readers that we're here to like witness these kinds of stories and help. I feel like that witnessing is a part of filling the gap. So I felt like this was a really, really important read, and I'm glad that I got to it. And I now fully understand why my partner called this like the best book he's ever read that he never wants to read again. And then the last book that I read in June was The Wedding People by Alison Esbach, which I read for my work book club. This was our book club pick, and I had to read it in like 2 days because I had forgotten about it, and then suddenly I was like, oh crap, book club is happening. So I read it really quickly, and honestly, it was really easy to read really fast. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Actually, I think that one and this one I both gave 5 stars because I really enjoyed, unexpectedly, like really enjoyed the writing and the characters and the story of The Wedding People. It's sort of a contemporary literary story about a woman who is going to a luxury resort to commit suicide, but upon arriving discovers that basically the entire place has been bought out for a wedding, and through a chance encounter with the bride, she kind of gets pulled into the wedding and starts to meet all of the people that she refers to as the wedding people who were there for the event, and, you know, kind of presenting a specific version of themselves as a part of their role in the event. And so she slowly gets to know all these people over time, and being the stranger, it gives her a chance to kind of do and say things that she wouldn't otherwise, and so she starts to form these like very genuine connections with the other people that are there for the wedding. And I just felt like this was a really hopeful, heartwarming story. I really enjoyed seeing how Phoebe interacted with everybody, and it was interesting to see like one character might give you a sense of who somebody else is from their perspective, and then Phoebe would get to interact with them, and you'd get this completely new, kind of more complex look at who that person was. And I really liked how all of the characters were just really nuanced and messy, and they just felt very real. And I liked the way that Phoebe kind of learned something from everybody that she met. It wasn't like the book was being like, and this is the lesson of this interaction, but more that like each person would be like, yeah, so I experienced this, and kind of here's my own takeaway on it. And then you would see Phoebe kind of take whatever she was told and incorporate it into her own kind of thinking about herself and what she wants for herself, but there would be some new Phoebe specific twist to it. And so I felt like that was just like very realistic, the way that we learn from other people and internalize, other people's experiences as we get to know them. So I just thought it was really interesting and well written. It was super funny in a way I wasn't expecting. I spent a lot of this book like laughing and grinning, and I just had a great time with it. I really, really enjoyed it, and I'm glad the book club made me pick it up. So these plus The Wedding People are all the books that I read in May and June. So not a whole lot, but honestly, really a step up in quality from where I was earlier in the year. And I am starting to gain a little bit of momentum going into July. I have a couple of things where I'm like, partway to most of the way through a book. So I have a few I'm anticipating finishing soon. And I'm hopeful that quality-wise, we've got a good sign. We've got a good omen that things are moving in a more positive direction, because I have been struggling this year, but it's just gotten worse through kind of the early part of the summer, like late spring, early summer months have just been really difficult in terms of reading slump. So I'm hopeful that things will be better as we move into July, and I'm glad that at the very least the few things I did finish in May and June were really, really good. So let me know down in the comments below what you were reading in May and June, and if there's anything that's particularly stuck with you, I'd love to hear about it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting at least once a week, and I hope to see you in the next video.